Welcome the anointed ones. The moment you stop playing the role they secretly assigned to you, the entire system starts malfunctioning. And here's the strange part: nobody tells you. Most systems don't collapse because someone powerful attacked them. They collapse because one unexpected person quietly refused to cooperate with the script. Not louder, not stronger, just different. History has shown this again and again. When one individual steps outside invisible expectations, entire groups suddenly begin acting nervous, defensive, or strangely distant, as if someone turned the lights on in a room where everyone preferred the darkness. That's what makes this story uncomfortable for people to admit. Because sometimes the system didn't fall apart on its own. Sometimes it fell apart because you stopped pretending it made sense. There are people who noticed the shift the moment you changed. They didn't announce it. They didn't explain it, but they felt it. Conversations became careful. Reactions became delayed. Some people who once stood confidently around you suddenly started moving like background characters who realized the main storyline was changing direction without their permission. It wasn't dramatic, it was subtle. And subtle shifts scare people the most. Here's the quiet truth most environments rely on. They expect you to stay predictable. Predictable people are easy to place, easy to manage, easy to explain to others. But the moment someone becomes calm, clear, and impossible to categorize, the system starts behaving like a phone with too many apps open at once, slow, confused, and overheating for absolutely no reason. And what makes this even more powerful is this: you didn't break anything loudly. You didn't start a rebellion. You simply stopped shrinking in places where shrinking used to be required. And that single decision has a strange effect on the world around you. People begin stepping back. Some start watching quietly. Others suddenly act like they misplaced their confidence somewhere near your shadow. Not because you attacked them, but because your presence exposed something they were hoping nobody would notice. So if things around you started shifting, if reactions started changing, if distance appeared where certainty used to live, there's a reason for that. Because sometimes the moment you outgrow the role they designed for you, you accidentally break the system wide open. Number one, you didn't attack the system, you exposed how fragile it already was. One of the biggest misunderstandings people have is thinking that systems only react when someone tries to destroy them. That's not true. Most systems react when someone quietly stops cooperating with expectations they were never supposed to question in the first place. What surprised people about you wasn't rebellion. It was your refusal to keep pretending everything made sense when it clearly didn't. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't organize a movement. You didn't go around trying to prove anyone wrong. You simply stopped shrinking yourself to keep things comfortable for everyone else. And the moment that happened, the structure around you started behaving differently. Not because you attacked it, but because your presence revealed it depended more on silence and agreement than anyone wanted to admit. Many systems survive because people follow patterns automatically. They repeat behaviors without asking why. They accept treatment they don't like because they believe that's just how things are done. But when one person quietly steps outside those patterns without drama or explanation, it exposes something important. It shows the system wasn't strong. It was just unquestioned. That realization makes people nervous. Some individuals weren't reacting to what you did. They were reacting to what your decision forced them to notice about their own lives. When they saw you move differently, speak differently, or refuse roles that once defined you, it became harder for them to pretend they didn't have a choice themselves. And that kind of awareness can feel uncomfortable for people who built stability around routine and approval. What makes this even more powerful is that you didn't need permission to create this shift. You didn't need support from a group. You didn't need recognition. The change started the moment you stopped cooperating with expectations that never respected who you really were. That's when the truth became visible. The system didn't weaken because you fought it. It weakened because it was never designed to handle someone who finally understood they were allowed to stand on their own terms. Number 2, your refusal to shrink forced others to confront how much they had already shrunk themselves. What unsettled people the most wasn't that you became louder, stronger, or more difficult. It was that you stopped making yourself smaller just to keep everyone else comfortable. For a long time, many people around you were used to a version of you that adjusted quickly, explained yourself often, and carried more than your share of the emotional weight. That version of you made life easier for them. It kept things predictable. It kept things smooth. And most importantly, it kept them from having to look too closely at their own compromises. When you stopped shrinking, something unexpected happened. People didn't just notice the change in you. They started noticing the change in themselves. They realized how many times they stayed quiet when they wanted to speak, how often they agreed just to avoid tension, how frequently they accepted less respect than they deserved because it felt safer than standing alone. Your growth quietly exposed those patterns without you saying a single word about them. And that kind of exposure can feel uncomfortable, even if nobody admits it openly. Some people tried to explain your change as attitude, others called it distance. A few even treated it like you had become difficult, but the truth was much simpler. You were no longer carrying the invisible pressure to keep everyone else relaxed at your own expense. You stopped performing the role that made everything easier for them, but heavier for you. What made this shift powerful is that it removed the illusion that shrinking was necessary for survival. People could see you standing differently, speaking differently, choosing differently, and still moving forward. That forced them to face something they had avoided for a long time. They weren't trapped the way they believed they were. They had just gotten used to adjusting themselves so often that it started to feel normal. And when someone realizes they've been living smaller than they needed to, they usually respond in one of two ways. They either grow, or they create distance from the person who showed them they could have grown all along. Number 3, you made hidden rules visible, and hidden rules lose power once exposed. Most people don't realize how much of daily life is controlled by rules they never signed up for. They think things happen naturally, that certain behaviors are normal, that authority is unquestionable. But systems, environments, and social structures survive on one secret. The more invisible the rules, the more unquestioned control they have. People follow them blindly because no one ever points them out. That's why things feel orderly, even when underneath it all the structure is fragile and dependent on compliance. When you started moving differently, acting without permission, and refusing to fit the invisible mold, you did something no one else had done before. You made the hidden visible. Suddenly, those rules everyone assumed were permanent became obvious. People realized that what they thought was inevitable wasn't inevitable at all. It was just expectation disguised as necessity. The moment you refused to obey silently, the system's magic disappeared. And once people can see the rules clearly, they stop being rules in the same way. Visibility removes authority. Exposure undermines control. This isn't about drama or chaos. It's subtle. It's in the way conversations shift, how routines wobble, how people suddenly hesitate to speak, act, or assign blame. The system relies on compliance, and compliance thrives in ignorance. You didn't have to confront it. You didn't have to protest it. You just acted without acknowledging its hidden instructions. That's enough to make the structure tremble. And here's the kicker. The people around you noticed. They felt it instinctively. Some were unsettled, others panicked. Few were capable of processing what had just happened. You weren't breaking things with force. You were revealing them for what they really were. And that revelation is far more terrifying than any rebellion because it exposes truth. What makes this moment extraordinary is that power is always temporary when it relies on secrecy. Once the veil is lifted, rules lose their grip, and people who depended on them begin to scramble. That's why they ran. Not because you fought the system, because you showed them the system had been fragile all along. Number 4, your independence disrupted people who secretly relied on your obedience. Most people don't realize how much of their comfort depends on the predictability of others. There are individuals who built entire routines, assumptions, and even self-esteem around the idea that you would always conform, explain yourself, and adjust to their expectations. They didn't necessarily notice it consciously, but every small decision you made to comply, every apology you offered unnecessarily, every compromise you swallowed quietly became part of the invisible scaffolding that kept them feeling safe. The moment you stopped playing the role they depended on, everything shifted. Your independence wasn't loud or confrontational, but that's what made it devastating. They weren't losing control over you. They were losing control over the version of reality they had carefully constructed. The one where you could be managed, predicted, and fit neatly into the system without rocking the boat. Your refusal to obey or explain removed the foundation they were leaning on, leaving them unsteady, exposed, and frankly, panicked. People often respond to disruption in one of two ways. They adapt or they withdraw. Many chose the latter. They didn't step forward because your independence challenged them to see their own limitations, weaknesses, or compromises, things they'd successfully avoided confronting for years. They weren't angry at you. They were unsettled by the mirror you held up, showing them the reality of what it meant to be free from obligation or expectation. What makes this effect so profound is how invisible it is to the untrained eye. Your independence didn't attack or destroy. It revealed. It showed others that the rules they relied on to maintain comfort were fragile, and that you didn't need those rules to survive or thrive. The ripple effect is subtle but undeniable. Patterns shift, alliances fracture, and those who thought they were secure suddenly step back, unsure of how to proceed. Your presence became evidence that compliance was optional. Your freedom became a quiet threat to the stability others took for granted. And in exposing that, you didn't just disrupt routines, you disrupted the entire psychological ecosystem that depended on your predictability. Number 5, you proved that approval is not required to move forward. For most people, life feels like a constant audition. Every decision is measured against the invisible approval of others, bosses, peers, family, or even strangers online. People wait for permission, validation, or a nod before taking action, believing that without it, their choices aren't legitimate. They don't realize how much energy is wasted trying to earn a green light that was never theirs to begin with. What made your presence so unsettling is that you didn't wait. You didn't look for permission. You didn't ask anyone to endorse your actions or confirm your worth before moving. You simply acted in alignment with your own understanding of what was right, necessary, or possible. And by doing so, you sent a shockwave through the people around you, whether they knew it or not. Your movement, quiet but intentional, was proof that progress does not require a committee, and that autonomy has far more power than compliance. People around you felt it immediately. Some were confused, trying to figure out who gave you the okay they themselves had been waiting for. Others were intimidated, realizing that their own hesitation was visible, that their constant need for validation made them slower, weaker, and more dependent than they wanted to admit. Your independence removed the crutch of approval, and suddenly the scoreboard they'd been using to measure themselves lost all meaning. The beauty of this moment is that it's invisible, yet undeniable. You weren't loud or confrontational. You didn't need to justify your actions or broadcast your success. The proof existed simply in the results you achieved, the clarity you maintained, and the calm certainty that you carried. That certainty alone is terrifying to anyone still chained to the idea that they need permission to exist, to act, or to thrive. By moving forward without asking, you revealed a truth most people fear to confront. Progress belongs to the willing, not the approved. Approval is optional, independence is powerful, and once someone sees it in action, the ripple effect changes everything. People either step up or they step aside, and many chose the latter. Number 6. Your clarity exposed how much confusion was being mistaken for leadership. In most environments, people mistake noise, hesitation, and endless justification for competence. Meetings are filled with talk that sounds important. Decisions get delayed under the guise of strategy, and authority often masks uncertainty. For years, confusion has been dressed up as leadership, and most people accept it because admitting otherwise would force them to take responsibility for their own inaction. The illusion survives because no one challenges it until someone like you steps in. Your clarity didn't arrive with fanfare or aggression. It wasn't about dominating conversations or proving anyone wrong. It came quietly, in the way you thought, acted, and moved with purpose. Your decisions were simple, direct, and consistent, and that consistency highlighted a truth that was impossible to ignore. Much of what people had been treating as leadership was just chaos with good branding. Suddenly, the hesitation they had normalized, the endless back and forth they had celebrated, and the so-called expertise they had deferred to all, looked flimsy in comparison to the calm certainty you carried. People around you felt it immediately. Some were unsettled because their own indecision was laid bare. Others were threatened because the system they relied on for guidance no longer made sense. You didn't need to point out their errors or critique their methods. Your presence alone acted as a mirror. It forced them to see how much time they had wasted following unclear signals, how much energy they had poured into structures that were shaky at best, and how often they had confused noise for direction. The most powerful part of this is that clarity is magnetic and disarming at the same time. It draws people in, yet it exposes weaknesses in ways no confrontation ever could. You didn't create conflict. You revealed truth, and in revealing that truth, you forced others to either adapt or step aside. Many couldn't handle seeing the system for what it really was. Some left quietly, some froze. A few adjusted. But everyone around you felt the ripple, and the invisible foundation of assumed control began to tremble. By simply being clear, decisive, and unshakable in your purpose, you dismantled illusions that confusion had been pretending were leadership, and that alone was enough to make people run. Number 7. You stopped carrying emotional weight that was never yours to hold. For years, you may have noticed it without fully realizing. You were absorbing tension that wasn't meant for you. People around you relied on you to smooth over conflicts, to explain themselves, to apologize for situations you didn't cause. You became the invisible buffer, the soft landing spot for everyone else's discomfort. That role isn't earned, it's assigned quietly, and most people never question it because it keeps them comfortable. When you stopped taking on that weight, everything changed. You didn't confront anyone, and you didn't make a scene. You just refused to carry more than your own responsibilities, refused to mediate the unspoken dramas that had been feeding off your energy, and refused to bend yourself to absorb stress that wasn't yours. That simple act revealed something startling. The stability others thought they had was built on your silent endurance, and once they realized it, they couldn't pretend anymore. People noticed immediately. The tension you used to hold for them had to go somewhere. Some tried to maintain control, but the system they relied on, the one where you quietly contained problems, started to wobble. Conversations that had been easy now carried an edge. Emotional dynamics that had been predictable suddenly shifted. You didn't create chaos. You simply removed yourself from carrying it, and that absence exposed the cracks that had always been there. The impact of this is deeper than just convenience or comfort. Carrying other people's weight for them makes you invisible in a subtle way. You are always reacting, always compensating, and the system depends on it. When you step away, the invisible scaffolding collapses quietly. People feel the difference in energy, in responsiveness, in tone, and they often don't know how to adjust. Some withdraw, some scramble. Some realize for the first time that you were never the problem. You were the stabilizer. By refusing to carry what wasn't yours, you revealed truth in the most powerful way possible. The system's apparent strength was an illusion. Stability had depended on your silent labor, and your decision to stop doing it exposed how fragile everything around you really was. In stepping back, you didn't break anything. You simply let reality speak for itself. Number 8. Your growth removed the role people assigned to you without your permission. For years, many people around you interacted with a version of yourself that they could predict, categorize, and even control. They didn't necessarily know it consciously, but they relied on that version of you to stay small in the ways that suited them, to accept certain limitations, and to perform specific roles that made their world feel orderly. That version of you was convenient. It was easy to understand. And it fit neatly into the invisible boxes they had created for everyone around them. When you grew beyond that, when you started living according to your own rules instead of the ones silently assigned to you, everything shifted. You didn't announce a war. You didn't confront anyone. You simply evolved, and by doing so, you removed the version of yourself that people had quietly counted on. That absence was destabilizing. People suddenly had to interact with someone they didn't recognize, someone whose choices weren't predictable, whose presence wasn't easily explained, and whose life wasn't governed by their expectations. The effect on others was profound, even if subtle. Some reacted with confusion, unsure how to respond to a person who had changed so fundamentally without asking permission. Others withdrew entirely, unable to cope with the responsibility of engaging with someone who no longer fit into their mental map of the world. And some tried to fill the gap by projecting assumptions, attempting to force the new you back into the box you had left. But nothing worked, because your growth didn't require validation, and it didn't depend on anyone's consent. What makes this moment extraordinary is that it exposes how much of social interaction relies on convenience rather than truth. People aren't always aware of the roles they assign, but the moment those roles vanish, they feel the gap. They feel the unpredictability. They feel the truth that life doesn't revolve around their comfort, and that freedom exists outside the expectations they've been holding on to. By simply growing into your own power, you didn't just change yourself. You forced the environment around you to confront the limits of their control. The role they thought you belonged to vanished, and with it, the illusion of stability they had been clinging to. Number 9. You showed others that loyalty should not require self-erasure. Most people think loyalty is about sacrifice. They believe it means swallowing your voice, hiding your needs, and bending yourself until you disappear quietly into someone else's expectations. That idea is celebrated in so many environments, from workplaces to friendships to family structures. People are praised for enduring mistreatment, for putting others first at the cost of themselves, and for staying loyal even when it silently destroys their identity. But loyalty, in its truest form, does not demand self-erasure, and you proved that. When you stayed loyal without disappearing, you exposed a hidden truth that few were ready to face. You honored commitments and responsibilities, but you refused to lose yourself in the process. You didn't shrink, apologize unnecessarily, or compromise your principles to maintain someone else's comfort. Your loyalty became active, conscious, and self-respecting, and that alone disrupted the invisible system of control others relied on. It forced people around you to confront their own misinterpretations of loyalty. They realized that what they had celebrated for years, endless self-sacrifice, was often just self-abandonment disguised as devotion. The impact on people was immediate. Some felt discomfort because your example exposed the compromises they had normalized. Others stepped back, realizing they had relied on your willingness to disappear for them, and suddenly that safety net vanished. A few tried to manipulate, testing whether your loyalty still had the old conditions attached, only to find that it didn't. Your loyalty was uncompromised, untangled from guilt, and unburdened by the weight of proving yourself to anyone. By refusing to erase yourself, you challenged the invisible contracts that bind people quietly to others' expectations. You made it clear that being loyal does not mean being invisible, that commitment does not require submission, and that integrity can exist without self-destruction. And in doing so, you disrupted the equilibrium of relationships and environments that had long depended on the opposite. People either stepped up, recalibrating their own definitions of loyalty, or they retreated, unable to process the truth you silently revealed. Your presence proved that loyalty, when truly lived, empowers both the giver and the system around them, without costing the self. Number 10. Your presence forced people to confront truths they were successfully avoiding. Most environments thrive on what people refuse to acknowledge. Whether it's mistakes, weaknesses, or uncomfortable realities, everyone around you has a list of truths they've been quietly ignoring. The system depends on this avoidance to maintain a sense of control, comfort, and predictability. It doesn't matter how many rules are in place, how many hierarchies exist, or how much authority is claimed. The real glue holding everything together is collective denial. That glue is fragile, and your presence has a way of cracking it. You didn't need to confront anyone. You didn't need to argue or point fingers. You simply existed differently. You moved with intention, made decisions based on clarity rather than convenience, and refused to engage in the silent compromises that others depended on. And suddenly, truths that had been comfortably tucked away started to surface. People realized that things weren't as stable as they had been pretending, that decisions weren't as justified as they had believed, and that the balance they counted on was built on selective blindness. That realization is unsettling. Some people reacted with confusion, unsure how to process the shift. Others withdrew, trying to protect themselves from facing truths they had been avoiding for years. A few attempted to manipulate, control, or gaslight situations to restore the illusion that everything was fine. But your presence made the illusion impossible to maintain. The system they depended on for comfort was no longer hiding behind excuses. What makes this even more powerful is that your impact isn't loud or confrontational. It's subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but the ripple effect is undeniable. By refusing to participate in denial, you forced a recalibration in the people around you. They either adjusted, grew, and faced the reality they had avoided, or they retreated, overwhelmed by the awareness your clarity created. You didn't create conflict, you revealed it. You didn't push change, you exposed the possibility of it. And in that exposure, you broke the invisible chains that had been keeping people in a false sense of security, leaving them no choice but to confront the truths they had spent so long running from. Number 11. Your confidence without permission is more threatening than rebellion with permission. Most people think disruption happens through loud actions, protests, or obvious defiance. They believe that making noise, challenging authority, or breaking rules is what shakes a system. But the truth is far more subtle and far more powerful. Confidence that operates without asking for permission is unpredictable, unmanageable, and deeply unsettling. It doesn't follow the patterns that others are used to controlling. It doesn't fit neatly into the expected narrative, and that unpredictability is what makes it truly threatening. You didn't need to stage a rebellion, yell, or force people to notice you. You simply existed in alignment with your own understanding, moving forward without waiting for approval, explanations, or validation. That quiet certainty was enough to shake people to their core. It made them question everything they had been relying on, the rules, the hierarchies, and their own sense of control. When someone acts with confidence that doesn't require consent, it exposes how much of the system is built on permission rather than merit, on compliance rather than capability. People around you felt it instinctively. Some tried to categorize you, to find a reason why you should fit into their world. Others reacted with subtle resistance, discomfort, or avoidance. Few were capable of processing the fact that your power wasn't loud or performative. It was intrinsic, undeniable, and entirely independent of their approval. That's why it feels more threatening than an obvious rebellion. Rebellion can be anticipated, contained, and argued against. Confidence without permission cannot. It simply exists, unmoved, and the effect ripples outward in ways people don't expect. The brilliance of this kind of confidence is that it doesn't require justification. You don't need to explain your actions, defend your choices, or earn recognition. Your certainty is enough. And in a world where most people measure themselves against external validation, seeing someone succeed, act, and move forward without asking for permission forces an uncomfortable truth. Control is an illusion, and independence cannot be tamed. By simply embodying confidence that required no consent, you disrupted assumptions, removed illusions of authority, and made people aware that real power never asks for approval. It doesn't need to. Number 12. You made comparison useless because you stopped competing entirely. Most systems survive because people are constantly measuring themselves against each other. Promotions, recognition, status, even social interactions are fueled by comparison. Who's faster, smarter, richer, or more liked? The scoreboard is always visible, and everyone assumes they need to play the game to survive. That's how hierarchies maintain control, how power stays predictable, and how people convince themselves they're in the right place. Comparison is the quiet engine behind obedience and anxiety, and most never notice it until someone like you stops playing. You didn't compete in the way everyone expected. You didn't measure your worth against their metrics or follow their invisible rules of who should be ahead, who should fall behind, and who should strive harder to prove themselves. You simply existed in your own lane, moving with your own standards, guided by your own clarity. That act alone removed the scoreboard. When comparison is impossible, the hierarchy loses meaning. The invisible chains people had been using to evaluate themselves and others suddenly disappear, and that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, even panicked. The reactions are subtle, but powerful. Some people try harder, doubling down on measures that no longer matter, only to feel increasingly frustrated because they are still being measured by a system you've stepped outside of. Others quietly withdraw, unsure how to respond when someone isn't engaging in the rules that kept them secure. A few attempt manipulation, trying to draw you back into their game, but your focus on your own path makes their attempts irrelevant. The game no longer exists in the way they understood it. By refusing to compete on their terms, you exposed the fragility of comparison itself. You showed that control, status, and influence are only as real as the participants who allow themselves to be measured. Independence and clarity make comparison meaningless, and that alone forces people to reconsider their place, their strategy, and even their identity. They either adapt or retreat, and many chose retreat, proving just how dependent the system was on everyone playing by invisible rules. You didn't destroy the system. You made its method useless, and in doing so, you reshaped the environment simply by refusing to compete. Number 13. Your authenticity exposed how much performance others were maintaining just to belong. Most people operate in a state of quiet performance. Every smile, every word, every nod is measured and adjusted to fit expectations that were never clearly stated. People learn quickly that survival often depends on blending in, staying agreeable, and performing the roles assigned by the environment, whether consciously or unconsciously. That performance becomes second nature, so seamless that most never notice how much of themselves they've sacrificed to maintain it. Your authenticity, however, changes the equation entirely. You didn't perform. You didn't adjust to someone else's rules or compromise your natural behavior to make others comfortable. You showed up fully as yourself, in ways that were visible, consistent, and undeniable. That presence had a quiet but powerful effect. It forced everyone around you to recognize just how much effort they had been putting into performing roles that weren't truly theirs. The authenticity you carried didn't create chaos, it revealed it. People suddenly saw the difference between living honestly and performing endlessly, and that comparison was impossible to ignore. The impact on others is immediate and intense. Some react with discomfort, realizing how much of their time, energy, and identity has been dedicated to appearances rather than truth. Others try to maintain their performance, but it becomes exhausting because the contrast between pretense and authenticity is impossible to overlook. A few withdraw entirely, unable to handle the mirror your presence has held up for them. The quiet confidence of someone living authentically highlights compromises that people had normalized and forced them to confront them, whether they were ready or not. What makes this exposure so disruptive is that authenticity cannot be negotiated. It doesn't ask for approval, it doesn't depend on alignment, and it cannot be faked convincingly by anyone who has been performing for too long. By simply being yourself, You removed the invisible scaffolding that others relied on to feel accepted and safe. Your authenticity didn't just make people uncomfortable, it made them aware. And awareness is the first step toward either growth or retreat. Many chose retreat, and in doing so, your presence quietly dismantled the roles that had been controlling everyone around you. Your authenticity proved that belonging doesn't require performance, and that revelation alone is enough to break the system's quiet rules. Number 14. You showed that influence is stronger when it's earned, not demanded. Most systems survive because influence is assumed, enforced, or manipulated. People act as if respect and attention can be commanded through position, pressure, or fear. They confuse titles, appearances, and authority with real power, thinking control is the same as influence. But true influence works differently. It doesn't need to be demanded. It doesn't require intimidation or grand gestures. It is quiet, earned, and undeniable. And that's exactly what you demonstrated. You didn't demand people listen to you. You didn't try to prove your worth or assert dominance. You simply acted in alignment with your values, made decisions with clarity, and carried yourself with confidence that wasn't contingent on anyone else's approval. That consistency became magnetic. People began paying attention because they were drawn to the results of your integrity, the calm decisiveness in your actions, and the certainty that came from knowing you didn't need validation. Influence, in its purest form, emerged naturally from the way you lived, not from the rules or hierarchies others relied on. The effect on your environment was profound. Some people tried to resist, thinking influence could still be commanded. Others were disoriented, realizing their methods of control had no impact. Many began following not because they had to, but because they saw the clarity, effectiveness, and strength in your example. You exposed a hidden truth that most people avoid acknowledging. Power enforced is temporary, but influence earned quietly is enduring and unstoppable. What makes this revelation so destabilizing is that it undermines the foundations others have built around authority. When influence is earned and not taken, it exposes the artificiality of systems dependent on fear, expectation, or habit. People either adapt and recalibrate their understanding, or they retreat, unable to operate in a reality where leadership is demonstrated rather than demanded. By showing that influence is a result of authenticity, consistency, and quiet confidence, you didn't just disrupt expectations, you redefined the rules entirely. You proved that real power isn't about control, and that the strongest systems crumble when they rely on anything less than earned respect. Your presence became the benchmark others couldn't ignore, and in doing so, you broke the invisible chains that had been holding everyone in place. Conclusion. The ripple. You unleashed. What you've done goes far beyond shaking the surface. You didn't confront the system with noise, force, or spectacle. You simply refused to play by rules that were never meant for you. You stopped shrinking, stopped seeking approval, and stopped carrying burdens that weren't yours. In doing so, you revealed the fragility of structures built on compliance, predictability, and unquestioned routines. Every act of clarity, independence, and authenticity you displayed became a mirror for others, a mirror they couldn't ignore. And when people are forced to confront truths they've been avoiding, the results are dramatic. Some retreat, some scramble, and some grow, but nothing stays the same. Your presence alone dismantled assumptions, exposed hidden rules, and redefined the meaning of loyalty, confidence, and influence. You proved that influence doesn't need to be demanded, that comparison is meaningless outside your own path, and that real leadership comes from authenticity, not performance. The ripple effect of your actions doesn't fade quietly. It reaches people in ways they never anticipated. The system didn't collapse because it was attacked. It collapsed because you showed what it had been all along, a fragile illusion sustained by quiet compliance and unchallenged norms. This isn't just about breaking molds. It's about proving a simple, undeniable truth. When you operate with integrity, clarity, and independence, the world adjusts around you. You have the power to expose weaknesses, reveal truths, and unsettle those who rely on pretense, without lifting a finger to fight. Your impact isn't measured in noise or aggression, but in the invisible shifts that force reflection, change, and recalibration. You've reminded the world that real power is quiet, enduring, and earned, and that anyone who attempts to define you will always find themselves reacting, not controlling. If this resonated with you, hit that subscribe button so you never miss insights that challenge the status quo. Smash the like button if you feel the truth of these words. Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your story of breaking through expectations. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to see how far quiet influence can reach. The system may try to control, but you've just learned how unstoppable clarity and authenticity truly are. God bless you.